So what actions can a president take to tackle climate change starting on day one, maybe especially in those crucial first 100 days?
It's a great question, Crystal, and a really crucial one. And the answer is there's a lot. There's a lot the next president could do with the powers of existing executive authority. There's a lot they could do to really push Congress to get their, get their act together and pass legislation, assuming, we have a pro-climate majority in both the Senate and the House. When it comes to tackling the fossil fuel industry and confronting fossil fuel executives, that looks like, stopping drilling for oil and gas on our public lands and off our beaches and shores. It looks like saying no more to federal permits for, oil refineries and natural gas export terminals and pipelines that are, cropping up still across the country, even though we know we need to get off of fossil fuels as soon as possible. And it looks like taking steps to hold polluters accountable for the damages they've caused to the climate, to communities from which they've extracted for decades, and making sure that they pay up and are held responsible. And I would also say, it looks like really, really taking steps to organize the structure of the government, right? Organize the White House to make sure that environmental justice is front and center in not just what, the next administration does on climate, but on everything they do, right? Because climate and environmental justice, it's everything, right? So we need a full-fledged mobilization to transform our economy, and that looks like, taking steps to make sure that everyone from the Environmental Protection Agency to, the Health and Human Services departments to Housing and Urban Development are ready to go from day one to tackle the emergency.
Thank you. Justin, did you want to jump in with,
Yeah, I do. I think the first thing that's important to note on what the president and what the executive level of government can do is just acknowledge the fact that Trump has rescinded, as was mentioned, over 100 environmental protections. He's lifted the ban on drilling in the Arctic. He's rescinded water pollution regulations for fracking. He's undermined rules related to toxic discharge. He's withdrawn legal rules around mercury emissions from coal power plants. And I think the number one thing to realize, as you probably saw in the debate, is this is not a guy who is prepared. This is not a guy who likes to dig into the reading or the science. So you have to ask yourself, why is a guy that is not prepared, doesn't like to read, rescinding some of the most specific and ridiculous environmental protections that we have on the books? And the reason is because he's appointed a coal lobbyist as EPA chief. And fundamentally, he thinks that cutting environmental protections, cutting quote unquote red tape is going to save money for his friends. And I think the number one thing that people are realizing is that we're not saving money from, the cuts to environmental protections and climate regulations. We're just seeing the costs passed on to later generations. We're seeing the costs in the form of higher healthcare costs due to asthma. We're seeing costs in terms of wildfires that are raging. So fundamentally, we just need a president who understands that putting off action on climate change is going to cost us more money to our economy and to our just overall well-being as a nation. I think also, the president can do a lot. They can make the EPA's Office of Environmental Justice permanent. It's not permanent right now. They can direct a large portion of climate and environmental investments to communities that are, most vulnerable. They can withdraw all of the rollbacks that Trump did on day one. President Biden could address all of those rollbacks. They could protect, 30+% of U.S. lands and oceans by 2030 and by 2050, which is one of the recommendations that the council came up with. So there's a lot of executive level action that can be taken, but we need to get a new president is the first thing that we need to do.